Hi. So let's talk about how you can use Karpenter to optimize your EKS costs. Most of the customers are running horizontal pod autoscaler to add more pods to meet the capacity of your workload of your application. But what happens if there's not enough capacity when there's not enough nodes available to schedule these pods? You run into this situation where you have all these unscheduled pods. And this is where Kubernetes needs to launch new nodes. This is where most of the customers use something like Cluster Autoscaler or Karpenter to add new nodes to handle these unscheduled pods. So they both launch additional nodes to handle these unscheduled pods. But it's important to know how they launch these new nodes. Let's talk about a scenario with Cluster Autoscaler first. So you have all these unscheduled pods, and Cluster Autoscaler responds to that by adding new nodes. So Cluster Autoscaler heavily relies on node groups. Essentially, it's masquerading AWS autoscaling groups. So when it's launching new nodes to schedule these pods, it's essentially like picking nodes from predefined configuration. Now you can have different node groups to handle different workload requirements, like one for GPU and one for other type of workloads, but it gets kind of complex very quickly. But it's important to know that when Cluster Autoscaler is scheduling new nodes, it's essentially leveraging node groups. So Cluster Autoscaler will schedule predefined nodes regardless of the requirements from the pod. So you might have all this unused capacity on these nodes. Now let's walk through the same scenario with Karpenter. Karpenter is a lot more aware of your pod requirements. It's a lot more aware of your application requirements. So when it's scheduling new nodes, it's actually scheduling these based on your application requirements. So you do not have that unused capacity like we saw in the Cluster Autoscaler. So the key difference here is, if you think about Cluster Autoscaler, it's essentially scaling your infrastructure first, and then it's kind of retrofitting your application to that. As opposed to Karpenter, it's actually is a lot more closer to Kubernetes API, and it's a lot more aware of your application requirements, and it's provisioning your infrastructure to meet your application requirements. So in a way, Karpenter is completely removing you from the constraints of autoscaling groups. One more thing to note here, that since Cluster Autoscaler is reliant on autoscaling groups, let's say if your app is dependent on storage to be available, the way autoscaling works, it will just try to scale the pods and nodes in a different availability zone when it needs to scale the app. But your pod might rely on that storage to be available in that availability zone. Since Cluster Autoscaler is not aware of your application requirement, it might just launch that instance, that node in a different availability zone, and it might cause an outage, or that pod might fail to start in that different availability zone because the storage is not available. So we have a solution called nKS, which is built on Karpenter, and we enhance Karpenter even further. So one of the limitations with Karpenter, it does not have a data source. It's making point-in-time decisions. One of the things nKS does really well, we actually make the best decision for your application so we can save you the most amount of money. So we look at your reserve instances, we can look at your saving plan commitments, and we also look at spot market. And then based on that, we're able to provision the right nodes to save you the most amount of money. So we also have advanced termination protection. We're able to detect node an hour before it might go away. That way you can run your workloads with the confidence even on a spot. We also reconsider pricing in real time. So we're always looking to see where we can save you the most amount of money, because in some cases, spot might not be the best solution. Here's an example where spot is equal to the on-demand pricing. And like I said earlier, we're making these decisions real time, because if you already made RI commitments and you're running spot, and Karpenter ends up picking the different instance type other than what you already committed to, you're essentially not saving money. So we're looking at everything to pick the right instance type for you to save the most amount of money. If you're not familiar with nOps, we are completely automated FinOps platform. We have a unique pricing model. The platform is completely free, and you only pay if we save you money. So I really hope you try this nKS functionality. Thank you.